know that 1.2 million individuals with a mental illness are incarcerated in the U.S. each year? In America, we readily incarcerate those with a mental illness without giving them the justice they deserve. And as Americans, we can be so quick to judge without trying to understand one's story or why they committed the crime that they did. Today I'll be discussing the history behind mental illness, the issues in our jail system, and the practical steps we as Americans can take to ensure justice for them. In history, those with a mental illness were first seen as outcasts, as the ancient Greeks practiced a process known as exposure, or leaving one out in the cold weather to die. And Aristotle himself said that there should be a law that no deformed child should live. Secondly, in history, those with a mental illness were seen as a God-given mistake. In fact, Martin Luther says that those with a mental illness are filled with Satan and should be drowned because they are a mass of flesh with no soul. Lastly, those with mental illness in history were seen as untreatable until further research was done. Thomas Malthus wrote the Essay on the Principle, which instituted the elimination of anyone who looked, behaved, or functioned differently. However, Jean Itard believed that those with a mental illness could receive the help that they needed. He says, "The mentally deranged were diseased rather than sinful or immoral." Next, I will be discussing the issues within our jail system. First, the death penalty is often discussed in politics or day-to-day conversations. One may argue that the death penalty is justifiable because it deters crime. However, I would argue and ask, is this morally just? As much of the decision of the death penalty is out of fear. As a primer leader in the Ohio Supreme Court, Lundberg Stratton says, "It was their history. They had been hospitalized 10 times, arrested numerous times for acting out of control. They'd be saying crazy things like aliens controlled the world. The whole gamut, you name it, I saw it." Next, humans can be very biased and judgmental to those with a mental illness in the criminal justice system. According to the Mental Health Association, individuals with serious mental illness are threatened and coerced into false confessions, have difficult understanding their rights, and have less access because of their mental illness. Another issue in the jail system is healthcare, as those in jail are not able to afford healthcare partly, and the jail system doesn't provide it always. And as a result, those inmates can struggle to find a job, can struggle to connect in relationships, and in the end even end up going back to jail. According to a study done by Baylorgen, a former inmate, he concluded that former inmates who received a professional diagnosis of any diagnostic and statistic manual of mental disorders, mental health disorders, were 70% more likely to return to prison at least once than those who were not given a diagnosis. Lastly, an issue in our jail system is the environment and the fact that police are not given effective mental health training. In the jail system, there is a lot of overcrowding, there's violence, there is a lack of privacy. And according to the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law, approximately 1,000 people in the U.S. were fatally shot by police officers during 2018, and people with mental illness were involved in approximately 25% of those fatalities. To close, I will be giving you some practical steps that you can take to ensure justice for these individuals. First, we need to ensure health care for these individuals. According to Dr. Jonathan Groner, who searches capital punishment for a living, the psychological mindset of the criminal is such that they are not able to consider the consequences at the time of the crime. Most crimes are crimes of passion that one does in situations involving intense excitement or concern. People who commit these crimes are not in a normal state of mind, and they do not consider the consequences in a logical way. Thus, I would argue by his statement that we need health care and we need to bring awareness that the death penalty is not morally correct. Thus, we need to advocate for those with a mental illness and bring awareness to how the death penalty does not solve the issue, but it causes more distress. According to the Mental Health Foundation, we must advocate to spare the lives of people with mental illness by prohibiting the death penalty and seeking to maximize due process protections and the assistance of legal counsel to avoid discrimination and unfairness. Next, when it comes to healthcare, we are lacking social workers and the programs to help these individuals with a mental illness to find their way back into the community. So I would argue that, I would suggest that we need to bring, as I said, bring more awareness to this topic and help provide more social workers for those individuals. Lastly, mental health training programs can be effective as police can better understand how to react to one with a mental illness, as they aren't taught how to do that. And environmental programs can be effective to help individuals have a more positive experience in jail, even though they did commit that crime and deserve that justice. Having that positive environment will help them get drawn back into the world. According to Howard Huzok, who does policy research, he believes that if people get drawn into the real world to get a job and make a living, they will be less likely to go back to prison. Thank you for listening to my speech, and I hope you learned a lot about how those with a mental illness are incarcerated in the U.S., and how we as Americans, we need to step up. We need to understand these individuals and not disown them, but see them as human, who, yes, they have mistakes, yes, they have caused pain in people's lives, yes, crime needs to be justified, but we also can't ignore how they are and how we can't ignore their worth, and we can't ignore that they aren't being given the correct resources that they need. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.